The fourth Dragon Ball Z movie was released on March 9th, 1991, just before Goku launches his Genki Dama against Frieza in the manga, and while Piccolo is fighting second form Frieza in the anime. In it, an army led by an evil being named Slug come to Earth to turn it into a cold, barren wasteland, as well as a mobile planet cruiser? He also gathers the Dragon Balls to restore his youth. Goku and company show up to stop him, and that's pretty much it. Even by the low standards of the Dragon Ball Z movies, not a lot happens here. There's not even really an everyday social activity being interrupted. Around the time of the fourth movie and continuing through the seventh, the DBZ movies are essentially on autopilot. Formula engaged, cliche, full speed ahead, we have our tropes, we have our established beats to hit, now just throw a villain in there and animate that sucker. We have to get 2 of these out a year. New ideas are for people who actually care. We have Piccolo saving Gohan, Kuririn lamenting, "Why does this always happen to me?" when he gets his ass kicked. For the 3-point conversion, we also have him lamenting the fact he hasn't gotten married. We have Goku defeating the enemy with a Genki Dama. There are even some Toriyama cliches thrown in there. I hope you aren't bored of Goku being taken out of commission early so he can show up to the battle just in time to save everyone. I know I'm not! There's only one of these 4 movies I think is really any good, and this isn't it. But on the other hand, I see a disproportionate amount of hate for this one compared to most other films in this franchise, and I just don't get it. It's not that good. It's not one I typically ever choose to just sit down and watch. But I really don't see it as being comparably worse to other DBZ movies. In fact, of the 4 I just mentioned, it's certainly not my least favorite. It might even be the second best of those 4, or at least tied for second best. Damn me with faint praise, I know, but I just don't get all the hate. You might as well hate the rest of them for being unoriginal and lacking in substance. I just find myself largely apathetic towards it. The most frequent complaint I see lodged against this movie is that its reveal is that its villain Slug is a Namekian who had already been said to be a Mazoku or demon clansman, and because it features a Namekian demon using the Dragon Balls to restore his youth, it makes this film a crappy ripoff of the Piccolo Daimao arc. And to that I'm sort of forced to scratch my head again and ask, and that's different from most of the other Dragon Ball films, how? This is the 7th Dragon Ball film overall, and the last one we covered is the only one I can think of that isn't heavily derivative of the source material. Even if we give the 3 Dragon Ball movies passes for being straight-up adaptations, you have the second Z film with its beam struggle almost identical to the one against Vegeta in the series, and then there's the first film that's so derivative of the Raditz fight that whole concepts and even scenes are lifted almost verbatim. And yet this is the one knocked for hewing too closely to the source material? Aside from the wish for youth, there's really nothing here that's similar to the plot of the Piccolo arc. That's largely because there is so little plot here, and once again I'm damning with faint praise. The only other lift I can think of is so minor I never even noticed it until now, and that's that when Gohan is taken out of the action, he is left in a near-identical pose to when Recoome breaks his neck. Okay, the obvious similarities are fun to joke about, but I don't see how it's any worse than anything else. Maybe it's because the original plot elements are pretty stupid. I mean, okay, Star Trek has done the idea of a celestial body as a form of transportation, but why do they compliment Earth on being this perfect, bright young planet if they're just gonna darken and freeze it? And what in the world is this crap about Mazoku not being able to handle sunlight? If this is a cheap copy of the Piccolo arc, well, Piccolo never had a problem in the sun. And that includes this Piccolo, who the minions seem to just know is or was a Mazoku, despite never having met or talked to him before. And of course this sunlight information is delivered in the clunkiest exposition ease you've ever heard. As you know, we're Mazoku, so we can't stand to be in the sun. Ugh. Come to think of it, this is the second Dragon Ball movie where the villains want to get the sun out of the way. Hey, you know a good way to keep the sun from shining on your planet? Turn the planet into a spaceship so you can fly it away from the sun! Oh, that's right, they're already doing that. But I'm not going to ding this movie for not being terribly consistent about Mazoku, since Mazoku always has been a very broad, poorly defined term even in the series itself, and the whole alien retcon certainly didn't help to clarify things. And speaking of the alien retcons, there's the fact that Slug isn't revealed to be a Namekian until near the end of the movie. It's treated as this big shocking reveal, so shocking it pulls Goku out of his new transformation, but I'll get to that in a bit. But honestly, is there anybody who hadn't already figured out he's Namekian? Yes, he's mostly covered up, but he's a big guy with green skin. The camera lovingly lingers on his large canines growing back in when his youth is restored. His wish to Shenlong is almost verbatim what Piccolo would wish for. He's a Mazoku. Upon seeing a Dragon Ball for the first time, he comments on how it evokes a nostalgic feeling in him, and his name is Slug, following the naming pattern of other Namekians. But it's hard to get a lot of drama out of the big twist of the movie when the audience figured it out half an hour earlier, to the point that they're comparing it to other story arcs. But while most of what I see in modern discussion is pointing out the supposed similarities its villain has to another villain, the most interesting or infamous element of this movie, though, appears in how brazenly exploitative it is. This should be obvious to those of you watching this video at release date or following Dragon Ball Dissection in order, but for those of you who might not be, let me remind you of something rather important. This movie is titled Super Saiyan Son Goku. Goku would not become a Super Saiyan in the manga for another 10 days after the release of this movie. In the last episode of Dragon Ball Dissection, everyone accused me of trolling them by announcing this movie next. Hey, that wasn't me! That was Toei. When this movie came out, there was no Super Saiyan. So the animation staff just made up their own Super Saiyan. What were they thinking? Oh, I can tell you. The Super Saiyan concept had been tossed around in the series for months, and was surely generating a lot of buzz, so jump on that when the money's hot. Who cares it's gonna be rendered a completely irrelevant oddity in just a matter of days? Today it's gonna bring in the bank. And it worked. This film was the highest performing Dragon Ball movie up to that point. There are many decisions in the franchise I could point to as shameless pandering to marketing, but they all pale in comparison to this. This is cash-in cynicism at its finest. And the odd thing is, apparently Toriyama himself gave them the idea for the hair standing up. I guess he hadn't finalized the design for Super Saiyan when they were getting the designs ready for this movie. Obviously, this had to be in the production cycle for several months. It really would have been funny if Toriyama had gotten to the Super Saiyan part of his story just a couple of weeks earlier, and then this would have been seen as a completely irrelevant bait and switch. If they really wanted to capitalize on this, they should have pinned Toriyama down on what his actual design would be, and then have the Super Saiyan transformation take place a couple of weeks earlier in the manga. The release dates of these movies are pretty firmly locked into the school holidays after all. Then there would have been the 1-2 punch of all the Super Saiyan hype finally coming to a head in the manga, and a movie released right afterwards perfectly situated to benefit from it. But whatever, it did its job. And in the grand scheme of all these movies, the pseudo-Super Saiyan in this movie is one of the few things that makes it stand out. Other than that, it's pretty forgettable. All of the pandering rationale aside, I rather like the false Super Saiyan. In some ways, I like it better than the real Super Saiyan. If they didn't get the idea of a golden aura from Toriyama, it's amazing that they got that detail right. The form almost seems like a golden Kaioken and has that same kind of violent unpredictability. The complete loss of the pupils also makes it more animalistic, and it's interesting that Toriyama would also make alterations to the eyes for the real Super Saiyan. However, my praise cannot extend beyond its attributes to its usage, because it's honestly pretty lame when you get right down to it. It shows up for a few moments and, well, really doesn't accomplish very much. You'd at least expect Super Saiyan Son Goku to defeat the enemy in a movie titled Super Saiyan Son Goku, but no, it's just the same old Genki-dama ending we've gotten for the last two movies. And then just to cover their butts, Kaio, who watches the action from the afterlife, only asks if this could be the power of a Super Saiyan. He never actually confirms it. So even just taking this movie on its own, you could legitimately make a case that there is no Super Saiyan Son Goku in Super Saiyan Son Goku. But something I really do like, something that has some real creativity to it, is the whistling. The movie in fact opens with Gohan and a decked out higher dragon paying a visit to Piccolo and doing this little whistling dance, only for Piccolo to yell at them to knock it off. But near the end of the movie, Piccolo rips off his own ears so that Gohan can whistle the tune again, because apparently Namekian ears are sensitive to whistling. Also, the concept of Namekians having more sensitive hearing is used later on by Toriyama in the Cell arc. I love the tune. Higher Dragon is adorable, and for those of you who don't care for the character, this is probably the smallest movie role he has. And did I mention that Piccolo actually rips off his own ears to keep himself from hearing the whistling? It might not be quite enough to make this movie good, but boy does it ever come close. Then again, it is rather strange that Piccolo and Gohan both sense the imminent threat while they're together, but then Piccolo disappears for half the movie. Why didn't he go with Gohan to check out the threat? No, go ahead, Gohan. If I go with you now, I can't show up dramatically later on to save you. See how the formula just makes things stupid? Once again, the threat to Earth causes it to become a barren wasteland, a wasteland which is immediately restored once the threat is defeated. But that also means it's the third movie in a row that features very muted colors. Stop being so bland! Put some color in here for crying out loud! But I do enjoy them putting the fighting into a cityscape. That's the first time Dragon Ball has ever used such a location, and the neon signs really pop against the dull backgrounds. The music here is very good. It's not my favorite soundtrack, but it's good. It goes into the series near the end of the Frieza fight, but really makes its impression in the Cell arc, where many of its tunes become staples. Ah, jeez, and remember how I griped last time about how Piccolo was just able to transfer ki from Gohan and Krillin to himself? Well, this movie has Piccolo sharing ki with Goku. I don't even really know what to say about that. Despite the fact that it came out a few days later, I guess this movie still got the jump on the idea. But I don't really like the idea, so congratulations? As if this movie didn't get the jump on enough things, it also features the debut of Watanabe Naoko as Chi-Chi. Sho Mayumi had portrayed Chi-Chi through all of her appearances up until this point, but she, perhaps proving how in step she already was with the Chi-Chi mindset, retired from voice acting once she gave birth. The staff didn't have to look far for a replacement though, as Watanabe had been with the cast from the very beginning as the voice of Puar. By this point in the series, Puar had been reduced to such a non-entity that Watanabe probably appreciated getting to take on a character who had just recently become quite a bit more high profile. Watanabe has portrayed Chi-Chi ever since, and so has certainly eclipsed Sho in the role. If I had to choose though, I like Sho slightly more. She just lends a bit more naivete to the voice that tends to counteract the insufferableness the character sometimes exudes, especially when written by Toei. But the truth is, Watanabe is so spot on most of the time, I find the two virtually indistinguishable. The term Super Namekian is also used here before Toriyama does. In the Cell arc, Kuririn muses over the term in relation to Piccolo. Here, Kaio uses it to refer to Slug, and it's pretty much just as meaningless a term. Slug is apparently some sort of mutation, whatever that means, and according to Kaio, Super Namekians are stronger than Super Saiyans and even Frieza. But I really see nothing that makes him different from a regular Namekian, and the only thing that makes him different from other Mazoku we've seen is that he can't stand the sun. And as far as X-Men powers go, well, that's pretty lame. Like the last two, this is simply a movie that could never, ever fit in the timeline if that's your game. Unlike the last couple of movies, it doesn't feature characters who should be dead, but the result of the Namek conflict once again makes this impossible to fit. The outfits and hairstyles place this squarely in the second half of the Frieza arc. Frieza is spoken of as if he's still alive, and it obviously couldn't be prior to the Frieza arc because then Piccolo would have been dead, Goku and Gohan wouldn't have been active fighters at the same time, etc. This is also the fourth movie in a row where the Dragon Balls, which can only be used once a year, are used. So as always, it's best not to think too hard about this, just focus on how exciting it is that Yajirobe and Dr. Brief make their first movie appearances! So that's Dragon Ball Z's fourth movie. It's really more impressive for how many concepts it rushes to introduce than as an actual movie. Like a YouTube commenter shouting first, it garners some attention at the time, but ultimately isn't really saying anything. But next time, we go back to the main series with the Frieza Arc Part 12, and Goku finally becomes a Super Saiyan. No, really, I mean it this time. This is it. There's nothing else in the way here. It's gonna happen.